Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Zygmuntowski. It's sad that I cannot be in person with you, but having a brief discussion with Bart, or it wasn't brief actually, he invited me and then we had like an hour of back and forth of discussions. I guess that the Hippo Summit must be extremely interesting and the place buzzing with ideas. So I just hope I can bring some additional ones. One word about me: I'm a PhD researcher at Kozminski University, focusing on data governance, especially in the healthcare context. And I also serve as co-president of the Polish Economics Network. So you might see a little bit of this economics or managerial operational touch to what we discuss. The topic is data commons and the European health data space, and most of it will be on data commons, hence it's bolded, and some on the context of the latest regulation and what we submitted as proposal, how we can amend it. I hope it might go into this direction, but I guess it might need our intervention. Okay, just to have a similar starting point, we all know data are valuable. Okay, The Economist has put this very famous graphic on its front cover, showing data as a kind of new oil, right? The world's most valuable resource. And this has often appeared in popular contexts, like data is the new oil, which obviously it isn't for various reasons. But also in other ways, like data is capital, as in the flows and circulations. Data is a shared resource because it can be used by in aggregation by a community that it describes, or that data is an infrastructure because it is a means for many different ends. So we see that data bring a multitude of possibilities, right? Knowledge-based decision making for policymakers, for companies, for different specialists. It allows us to build new products, be it AI or products like just new drugs and therapies. But it can also lead to better quality of services that we render. So it's both about governance, it's about shipment and building of products, and it's about services. The possibilities are multisectoral. But very often data is underutilized, right? So the actor who holds data maybe doesn't have the capacity to use them, just holds them or uses them for just a very small for a small type of activity that doesn't leverage the full value of this data. Very often data are held in data silos, in legacy systems, especially when software was bought 20 years ago, for example, and nobody has touched the data sets that are hidden inside. There's a lot of company lock-ins when a certain company starts providing software and holds you on a leash because you have to go back to buy more of this software, to buy maintenance, and in fact you are not the owner and you cannot access this data fully. We see a lot of cross-sectoral barriers, be it sending data from business to government, or just from one type of industry to another type of industry. And the final question, even if we solved all this, we know we have the capacity, we break data silos, we overcome barriers, we still have the final question of who actually gets to control data. And we see also that the number of data is rising. And now this is just data for Poland, just because I spent quite some time digging into them and asking the Ministry of Health for precise numbers. So, for example, in terms of the ongoing digitalization of public healthcare systems, spending from all types of sources, from the main budget of the state, from country-wide programs, from European funds, all of it increases on a cumulative annual growth of about almost 25%. The number of e-health accounts, so the online patient accounts, also is growing. In the 2 years of the pandemic, it grew from 600,000 to 10 million. Okay, that's a vast increase. But also it's not only the number of the accounts itself, but also the services that are available in the accounts are booming, and new things and new types of services are included. That means more data is generated. And finally, we see also outside the public healthcare sector a lot of new sources which are sometimes non-medical, but they are definitely about health. Think about fitness and wellness apps or trackers, wearables, sensors of different kinds, and also the non-public sources like private care facilities and different types of digital therapeutics. So the general promises of database healthcare are huge. Now, to see what are they, I asked also the AI Midjourney to kind of visualize for us what would it look like for human doctors and medical robots to be together in the operating room. I think the socialist realism style kind of gave it a dark flavor. But the promises of database healthcare are most of them are very, very bright, right? So tailor-made preventive care, forecasting diseases, telemedicine, automated diagnostics, research for rare diseases, but also on the side of what the citizens get, right, in terms of services. So smart health assistance, planning of medical demand, and assessment of care quality. All of that seems to be almost accessible to us, but almost is still one day into tomorrow. And why is it? Because obviously there are some perils, right? Some things can also go wrong, and this definitely must have contributed to the boundaries we see. So a lot can go wrong, right? And some of it hit our media and showed us what is out there. So the many things that happened to National Health Service, right? So how, for example, Google bought DeepMind, which in the era pre-GDPR had a very extensive data sharing deal that didn't fully say where does this data flow stop and what are the data uses, the deal of NHS with Palantir, but also if we see, for example, outages, prolonged outages of cloud-based services, that also can contribute to someone not getting the care they need. And finally, we have cases of, for example, 23andMe basically selling your data, genetic data. So again, a harm to privacy. And one that is very important in our discussion of data governance is this example. So the example of the so-called pregnancy register, right? Here you have from Radio Z, and it's actually in the section of the website for one of the largest Polish radio stations, which says basically entertainment, right? So it's not politics, it's not economy anymore, it's not healthcare. It comes directly into entertainment, meaning everybody reads that. It's a news and story of the day. And what it says, pregnancy register, sharp reactions of celebrities online. And what they quote, women are to be incubators under control. And the same we can see here in the English media. Poland's new pregnancy registry raises red flags. It is a very big one. It's a thing related to data and to government overreach that really raises serious concerns. But really, does it? Like, is this story even true? First of all, the pregnancy register is actually a single line in the patient summary in electronic health records. It exists in all EU countries. But not in all EU countries, or in the most of them, it does not raise so much concern, right? So there must be something very specific, context specific or country specific, that leads to this kind of backlash. First of all, it is related to some kind of general trust in institutions, right? And institutions being the government, the parliament, but also media, also health experts. So all of these different societal institutions, they create some kind of context in which we either trust somebody handling the data in an expert scientific way, or we believe there is some kind of a scheme that we cannot see. And then related to it, and this is country specific, the attack on reproductive rights that we have seen in Poland. I mean, the decision of Constitutional Court to restrict the access to abortion. So the question that we have as the starting point for data governance: what does matter? What is true, or what people trust is true, and that impacts their decision making and what they demand in terms of their privacy and data governance. So when we ask, okay, how to govern data in a sensible way, we actually can expand this question, if we want to understand the full scope of it, to ask how to collect, process, and share health-related data between public and private actors so that we increase access, interoperability, and transparency, and that leads to better care. A lot of assumptions here on the way. And to kind of visualize where we can look for answers, we can take a look at this, what I call the data governance trilemma, right? So the three points are the choices we can get, we try to take, but we can never fully achieve all three of them. This is a trilemma. We can go for some of them and strike some kind of balance, choose a setting in the space of possible configurations, but we cannot maximize all three. So we cannot, at the same time, to a full extent, serve the public interest, like, for example, doing all the predictions related to a pandemic situation, while we fully protect fundamental rights. I don't mean privacy, but also right to non-discrimination and other types of rights. And then at the same time, generate maximum economic value and profit. That would obviously lead to a lot of extractivism and to restriction of intellectual property rights, probably privacy infringements. So we end up with these three different goals, and we can choose only somewhere between them. On the edges between them, we have some settings that we know very well. Some kind of, I would call them coalitions, maybe. The coalition of data sovereignty, which fights back against this overreach of corporations. Data ownership, which is mostly about we claim and for our benefit. And data extractivism, which is the silent coalition between authoritarian or overreaching governments with the big tech corporations. Definitely, to strike a balance between those goals, we need trusted institutions. So for this setting to work, there needs to be some kind of formalized procedure, some space of debate and of decision making that allows us to even ask those questions and to make meaningful decisions, put them in stone, and then execute them. And that would constitute a trusted data institution if all the sides would agree, okay, this is the right process. So instead of just having rules and rights, what I see as the kind of GDPR paradigm, right? Instead of having only this, and this continues in the other types of regulations the EU is building, we need to shift our attention to dedicated institutions and infrastructures. Because even if we create the best rules for data altruism, for data sharing, if there is no institution that can actually have a sustainable business model to employ staff, buy the infrastructures, to keep the entire maintenance and to take the right decisions, the rules are gonna be void. So this is what we basically call, and this is how we see the data commons. Data commons is a trusted institution for sharing data. So it is the data itself that is shared, but also this is the vehicle that allows us to kind of commonize the data and perform the common, for example, analysis on data. And here you can see a graph of how we see this kind of combination of different activities that could happen in a data commons. Here in a public data commons, so a public institution, but that acts as this vehicle for data commons, where the data stakeholders have control over it, but also we allow access, but we don't fully ever give just unrestricted flow of data. Together with Instrat Foundation, I conducted a study with different stakeholders, around 30 of them in Poland, from across, from the academia, from NGOs, medical professionals, also government companies. And it was a workshop which combined a ranked poll with a deliberative Delphi method, right? So first we polled, then we discussed the entire results of the poll with everybody saying how they voted for it, why they did it, how they would comment on the full voting, and then we redid the same voting to see whether this deliberative phase changed everybody's opinions and allowed us to reach towards some kind of consensus. And we asked the question, which critical success factors are the most important for building data commons? And we definitely see, obviously, without good quality of data, there is no data commons, right? You need the resource to even perform commoning of this resource. But the very second is institutional trust. Good, strong, trusted institution is a necessity. But then, what is interesting is that protecting rights and protecting public interest as those two goals from the trilemma are also very, very close to the top. There is also a need for data sharing mandates, so definitely regulations, maybe even breaking up monopolies. And what is interesting is that the value proposition, right, so the economic value isn't regarded as actually that extremely important. It has to follow the data commons, but it's not crucial to establishing the operations. So what we see is that actually data sharing or sharing the value of this data goes together with trust and protecting rights, not against them. And we also checked this relative change in factor importance before and after the Delphi deliberation. And what we see is very interesting because obviously everybody hearing what the technical people were saying and what the medical professionals building AI tools were saying, everybody started regarding data quality even higher. But what is interesting, social dimensions are re-evaluated as more important. So hearing other stakeholders speak up, everybody regards their opinion as more valuable than before they were brought to the table. The same goes for institutional trust, and what is interesting, even for collective governance. Public interest and privacy, as you can see, are not in this graph. That means that they stay very relevant at the beginning of our workshop. They are relevant at the beginning and they stay so at the very end. But what is interesting is that economic value gains a little bit. So it seems that understanding also the problems with interoperability and quality of data, people also see, okay, we actually need to somehow finance these operations. So in the end, we conclude that collective deliberation improves decision making in a way which is impossible to attain in a scenario of individual data management. The idea for data pods where everybody does the cookie banner consent to share data is not only a nightmare, but it just brings less value, less innovation. Trying to form this into some kind of guidelines for practitioners who work in the social economy or in data cooperativism and all that, we, with Open Future Foundation, we created this design blueprint for data commons. So we designed, and this doesn't follow fully the Ostrom's idea, right? So Elinor Ostrom's classic common pool resources management. We don't follow them. Start trying to more go bottom up from the workshops and from the knowledge that we gathered, instead of using a universal theory of the commons. And what we see is that there are three main groups of rules. First of all, stewarding access, right? So setting rules that show who has access, under what conditions, how do we preserve rights. The second group is collective governance. So how do people participate and use the possibility of democratic oversight to have this kind of trusted institution and trusted community. And in the end, the outcome of this, which is creation of public value, right? So public value meaning not only public sector value, but public value as in something that is open, widely accessible, generated through a purpose and capacity building and sharing of this value. And we see that, for example, for stewarding access, it's not only a privacy enhancing technologies, but also some kind of permission interface. So something very tangible that we have to build. In terms of the collective governance, we have problems like, for example, the need to kind of define what a community is in this case. And for public value, without some kind of license for commonwealth, meaning not everybody can appropriate, like for example, big tech cannot just take our technology, but we share it only with those who have the same type of values and who want to build on top of our license. These are the kind of operational tips that we found to be extremely useful. And now finally, getting to the cherry on the cake, the icing on the cake, the European health data space. So a very basic summary for those of you who have heard of it only just now. The regulation is about easier access and control over data for individuals. It creates new institutions for European Health Union. It supports cross-border infrastructure and services for health services. It provides tools for monitoring of health records, apps, and devices, and it unlocks data and reuse of data for research. And this is crucial because the secondary access to data for research will be rendered via health data access bodies, which were first modeled on how the Finns did it with their FinData. Can we make this better? Obviously, these health data access bodies are the key, because if they are going to be the powerful institutions that govern all the access and that pool data, then the entire struggle is who gets to rule that, right? And because we see in the latest Eurobarometer that 50% of citizens trust EU, but only 35 national governments and parliaments, it means the EU has to bake in mechanisms in the regulation to empower citizens instead of waiting for the member states to do it themselves. And when filing this consultation document, we focused on 4 things which we think are very important, based on what you heard in the story on data commons. First of all, there needs to be collective data governance of these access bodies. We see that, for example, patient supervisory boards or supervisory panels could be a way to have to give patients final say in how these operate. Second of all, a trust by design and social control of data access bodies. If they step over, if they overreach, there has to be a method over member states, so on the EU level, to kind of audit them, to put fines on them. The third is cap on access fees for public institutions. In some of the countries, like in Poland, in the energy sector, so this is a different data line, but very similar, we had a case of, for example, one public institution setting fees so high so that other public institutions could not buy data on the energy sector, so they couldn't enforce the law properly. So there has to be definitely a cap on access fees for public institutions, exactly on the level of only the costs of the procedural access. And finally, business to government data sharing rules. We see in the Data Act that definitely any kind of public interest is pushed out by big tech corporations. If we want to have serious access to what big tech and what to some of the health companies have locked in their silos, we need some mechanism that will tell that the European health data space is in this sector, has the tool and can do that and can access those. And finally, obviously, but this is just beyond, I think, the scope of data governance itself, but out of this data, we will create products, right? So we definitely need some kind of sensible ownership, sensible license for these products, which will not restrict them to corporations. A lot of further challenges to be solved. Just to quickly wrap it up so I don't take too much space. Definitely, to stop value leakage, we cannot just have full open access and full data flow. We rather opt for some kind of terms of access, like for example, the open algorithms model from MIT. There is the collective governance, and for example, NHS AI labs with their patient panels have showed how to do that. We need strong interoperability, and when I mean strong, that means standards across sectors, devices, so that these are common standards on the top level for anyone who is in the industry, but also things which are related to boots on the ground. A lot of doctors that I speak to say that they are already overburdened with a lot of digital tools that are brought to them, and it's actually not less work, but more, because generating data is bureaucracy, to be very precise in saying that. So we need some kind of digitalization assistance that will come into healthcare providers and help them in setting this up. A final touch to have this large picture. A lot of people criticize this sovereign approach, saying that it's some kind of autarky, like the EU wants to detach itself from the world, that it's maybe protectionism, which is against, single market or other ideas like that. Obviously, we see one thing. Even if we can do pilots on member state level, the EU is on the right scale to have the capacity and has the ambition to create very robust digital policies. And I can give you all the examples, but let's just show Digital Services and Digital Markets Act as the clearest examples of that. And sovereignty doesn't mean self-sufficiency. It means control, so it's about the rules, and it means legitimacy to control, right? So the trust that our institutions are doing the right thing. And health data questions are not only about health, but they are digital questions. And because they are digital, they automatically are geo-economical. If we fail to build this legitimacy and understand this context, we will fail to implement sensible data governance. And the consequence of not doing it well is just low healthcare and medical innovation, low trust in the healthcare system, and not net social losses in the end. If you would like to see some further readings, recommended readings, one thing is the feedback on the proposal of European Health Data Space that we submitted with Open Future and Instrat, and another is Data Commons Primer, which is, as you can see, a primer. It's an absolute starting point for anyone wishing to understand what are Data Commons about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jan, for this wonderful presentation that gave us insight in the Data Commons, which is a name that is finding importance again, because Eleanor Ostrom's work is quite a while ago. But I think the difference with the Commons in her work is that data is endlessly available in that sense. So the tragedy of the Commons could look a bit probably differently. But I want to go a bit on the European data space and first start on the upper level. The overall goals of the European data space, if you read them, it's about, the first line that comes is about citizen empowerment, giving people access and control to their data. Can we dig into that? Because if you then look into the constructions and the drafts and everything what is out there, I don't see quite a lot of these things focusing on citizen and patient empowerment or citizen science. I see a fenced domain where there is access control and it's fenced still, and there are bodies that control who get access or not. How does that one world that there is control about access and giving every single citizen access to his data, how does that combine with each other?
Yeah, sure, you're very right that first, I think 2 or 3 years, everybody was waiting for finally getting some kind of definition of what this common European data spaces will be. And I remember just reading, file after file, regulation after regulation, waiting to understand, okay, what is this gonna be about? Because it seems like they want to step into a space of let's build institutions and let's build infrastructures for data, but they just didn't know how to approach it. And I think by starting from health data, they kind of automatically stepped into a sector which is dominated in Europe by public sector bodies and by welfare systems. So automatically they stepped into a sector which is very heavy on a government side. And so that would kind of mean that probably if you want to pull it into this citizen empowerment, you should include the citizen empowerment somewhere, right? Instead of just building stronger bridges between different health spaces in different member states. Okay, that I get. It's like a uniformization, standardization on European level. That's great. But that doesn't change the balance of power between, civil society, NGOs, businesses, large corporations, startups and innovators, academia. When you have these actors, I don't see how that changes very much. And the introduction of this health data access body is the introduction of another kind of like national agency, which is okay. So if you want to take public sector data and reuse them, I understand they want to have it under control. But this is the perfect opportunity to do what you're saying, to finally take the gold lettering on the first pages of the common data spaces on citizen empowerment and, stronger communities and all that, and bake it in. And I don't see really that happening yet. It seems to be more about strictly reuse for science, and here it can very quickly erode into some kind of open for all who has enough funds to kind of hop over this regulatory obstacles.
Well, it's quite challenging because when we discussed with Paul Keller before, he mentioned something. He said like only large organizations have the economical means to be able to process that data. And you mentioned something as well that large or smaller institutions are not able to extract the value out of the data because they don't have the economical means. So there is this sense that only large organizations can handle these large data sets, have the infrastructure and the capacities. Now, I'm now focusing 3 years on open source AI, and when I started this journey, everybody said like, "What are you gonna like? What open source AI? Like that doesn't make any sense. Like there is no opportunity there." And as AI and machine learning is most probably one of the most powerful technologies that humanity will ever create if you look into the future, but even if you look today, how it recommends what we read and how it influences society, I believe in the open form of AI. I don't believe in opaque models that define things for us that we cannot even peer review. And that was my main motivation. But then we did a project based on breast cancer, and open source is a joint collaboration layer with people collaborating based on a shared set of values and norms. And mostly people think then, well, open source is about these hackers sitting in the basement doing coding during the night and working for free. Now, GitHub, who is the biggest open source software code platform where now 100 million registered users are sharing software code, 52% of the people registered there are coming from the industry and share. Like there is this large notion of sharing in the software industry. There is this idea that we share R&D costs, but also allow citizens and coders at home to participate. And I think software is the only single industry that I've known that managed to first accelerate, like we have seen all the growth factors in digitalization, but B, they were able to create software code morely as a common good because everybody can dig into these libraries, can read them, understand them, they can learn how to program, and it drives competition. Now, when we first started 3 years ago in open source AI, people said, well, you need a lot of compute power, you need people that collaborate. And this summer, things happened that nobody could believe 3 years ago, because that same sort of collaboration that we have seen in software started happening in the AI research space. Not research in terms of one research institute, but over 1,000 researchers collaborating together to train an AI model that is killing the monopoly of open AI, which was nothing to do with open, it just as the name open AI, but everything else is opaque. And it showed that the power of collaboration, it showed the power of openness, and it showed that even when you don't even have an organization, just a fictional, virtual organization, people can collaborate based on open standards and open values and open norms, and they share and they make things that are common good. Like the model that they created, Bloom, was then published under a responsible AI license, and had been trained on a French supercomputer, JZ, and is made available for free. And this is generating so much new research, and it starts flourishing because there is so much cross-pollination in the industry, in the startup scene. We see the same thing with image to text to image AI, and it shows that the power of collaboration works best when it's completely open, and there are less gatekeepers, like there's less control. Because I ask myself the question, if we define the steward access, who defines the rules of somebody getting access? Like, I give an example. When in COVID happened in Germany, a group of 500,000 Germans donated their data from the Apple Health Kit to the Robert Koch Institute. And there was so much data in there, like there was other data from the Apple devices in there, anonymized, that I asked, can we do a datathon so we can have thousands of hackers going on the data so we can find solutions together. And the only thing what happened is that 4 researchers, after 1 year, published one paper and then another paper, but the data was only hoarded within that research institute, and it was not used openly, like it was open research and published as open access. But there were 12 months in between the donation part and the release of these first publications. And I doubt that we have now a framework that really taps into that power that we have seen during COVID, that we have seen in open source movements, because I believe that in Europe, the best thing we can do is to collaborate and to collaborate with small and medium enterprises and together. And what I feel that the European health data space is more a relationship between governmental bodies and large industry players. But I don't believe that this will change or reverse the current trajectory where larger organizations have much more information asymmetries, have much more power, they have much more dominance to create IP that then defines perhaps the price because they make things artificially scarce. So my question is, who defines these rules? Like, and what are the rules if we need to go to empowering citizens and openness and everything what they promise, the common good, all these things that are close to every European's heart.
Yeah, thanks for this. I think what you said on what is happening in the AI space in terms of like open collaboration, this is extremely reassuring. I would say that our species is capable of constantly building, collaborating, like, apes together strong. I mean, this is seriously like the basis of what makes our species great. But I think I am not on the side of radical openness, and I will just say briefly why. Because I think you have to define access to protect the smallest and the least capable and the use of this data. Without defining access, you will it can very shortly lead to a situation we are facing now in Poland, where we have an NGO which goes from hospital to hospital, with people signing deals, which I'm not pretty sure they are consistent with GDPR, but signing that they donate all their health data to the NGO, and we know that the NGO has ties to the biggest big pharma players, and once they signed off their consent, they have no say, or at least that's how they see it, right? Because nobody ever comes back to them, but they have no say in what happens next. So their access is their right to define this access is a one sign, yes, okay, I agree, and this is it. This is the end of story. And I think you need access because if you take it natural resources, almost all types of natural resources can be just destroyed if we do not handle the sustainability of access. And this happens also for data and knowledge, because just to give one example, I think the story of Android as an operating system is this kind of story. But it doesn't mean that there is depletion of Android. I mean, it's open source. You can go to GitHub and just like download whatever you want. But once Android was connected to Google's stack by some people who started contributing to the project, and at some point Google just gatekept it, saying, okay, so this is our Android because this is our version, it's IPR protected. The rest of the Android, well, it's open source, you can use it. Well, that ended up in someone having greater capacity to extract value and then build a completely proprietary tech stack on top of it. So openness has to be protected. So try to remain very open and, I'm a cooperative entrepreneur. Cooperatives are open and voluntary, but we always check who tries to come to our cooperative and who wants to become a member. There has to be some kind of background check. And a final note on what you said about the small institutions, small companies, innovators. I think there is a small misunderstanding in this debate that very often people believe that small institutions are not capable of building great innovation or great AI. They are capable. The greatest entrepreneurs I know are people who were, seriously speaking, in Poland, the greatest entrepreneurs in medical profession are medical professionals who realized, okay, this works in a wrong way. I need to repair this. So they start building a startup on the side, and one day they wake up and they realize, I'm no longer like a solo medical professional. I'm now an entrepreneur with a company building a product to help other people who used to be like me. But what they cannot do, that's what I think, they cannot do infrastructure. You have to have a secure computing infrastructure, so those innovators on top of this infrastructure can start building, because infrastructure needs a maintenance and a sustainable business model, and it needs to be very open and capable of scaling to different needs of different innovators. But infrastructure has to be very tightly, either publicly or to some kind of, in some social model, regulated and overseen, so nobody ever says, like, we don't like your car, you're not driving our road. That's not the point of infrastructure, right?
Yeah, but even if you need the infrastructure cloud space, a lot of the infrastructure is based on open source again, and it's hosted. So we can go into that philosophical discussion, because if it's open, companies can still build their own infrastructure. It is mostly a matter of having the ability to have access to capital that allows you to scale and play these economies of scale that brings your price down and allow you to be competitive. So it's that size thing that drives it. But coming back to the control is not defined. I haven't seen in the European health data space a set of rules that if you are a citizen, then you should always get control. If you want to do this, there is no framework of control. Like the control now is biased or is opaque. Like there was even no regulatory pricing model, and there was and I discussed this with Paul before, so I'm not going to go in too deep in there. But in the European health data space, there is also written that some of the data can have still specific legal protections, such as intellectual property. So that means that within the data space, we have islands that are protected with IP, or it just is in practical terms. If you ask for access, you just don't get access because it's protected. And that makes me kind of suspicious working for the industry since a long time, because if this is the case, hospitals will still do their deals with larger research, private research institutes, and give access to data where within that data there can be suddenly something discovered like a BRCA breast cancer gene that defines that this gene leads to a higher mortality. The breast cancer gene was the one from Angelina Jolie and was the one that is a very good indicator, but it was the one that was kind of owned by Myriad Genetics, who had several trials in US court to try to patent it. Another kind of data set could be the Oncotype breast cancer data set, which is a sample of 21 different gene arrays that also could be detected in a data set. And that breast cancer data set is nothing else as a simple PCR test, if you would simplify it. So sorry for the listeners who probably would kill me now when I say this, but it's simple in that sense. Once you have it, you have diagnostical equipment to test it. And the Oncotype test took 10 years from the first paper to the acceptance in Germany, because they never released their data. They never wanted to release the whole data. So what they did is having a double-blind study, clinical trials, going through the whole regulatory process of acceptance. And because it was closed, they created something that is then artificially scarce. And the PCR test, who costed 50 euros, suddenly cost 4,000 euros. And because somebody owns it, like the Oncotype breast cancer is owned. And that is the game that is being played. Like, people are using data to find discoveries, for finding new biomarkers, to find new predictors. And if you are the first one, or the one that has the ability to acquire data from 200 different institutes in Europe, and that can only be done by probably large institutes, and you're the first one that can see these patterns in the data, you will be the first one patenting it. And I think that is not the promise of what the European health data space should be. I see it as an acceleration of appropriation. I see it as a transgression of norms from the public sphere into the private sphere. We will have Sharon tomorrow talking about this. And everything what we learned in the COVID times, where openness accelerated, it was the 10th of January, it was the Chinese virologist, I think it was called Zhang, and he published the sequence of the COVID virus. And only 4 days later, the team of the Charité, under the lead of Victor Korman, they published the PCR test as an open protocol for everyone to use. Now, compare this now with the Oncotype test, and you have both similar tests. Like, one was published as an open protocol, and it led to thousands of test centers competing with each other on price. So the price stayed between 50 and 70 euros. And the other one, a monopoly, intellectual monopoly, in somewhere in the US, where we have to pay 4,000, and it's not open. People can not fork it, augment it, do further research on it. And I think that is, for me, so difficult to understand, that we go and not move towards that new model which should accelerate. And I think acceleration is that what we need. We need to be competitive, be fast, we need speed, we need accessibility. And I think having these access bodies, that there was a study in Germany that it takes between 3 to 6 months to get approval, to get access to data sets. That is not fast. So I want to challenge that what you said before. Like, if we have these gatekeepers that are also gatekeepers, just like Google is a gatekeeper and a big tech is a gatekeeper, who is defining the rules to get access?
Now, this is exactly the right question, because I wouldn't be so skeptical of the gatekeepers. I mean, someone will always guard the gate. You cannot just publish all patient data online, right? That
Yeah.
would be an infringement of privacy. So someone has to guard the gate. Now the question is whether, they, as in big pharma, big tech, guard the gate and then guard the product, as you said, guard the knowledge, or kind of we guard the gate. By we, I will get back to your question because I see you're like attacking the main, most crucial point. But like, or we set up a gate that says, passing the gate, you accept how we run things. And we run things this way. And what is interesting is that this FinData model that I mentioned, I'm studying it now, so this is from an incoming paper, but I can spill the beans for you a little bit. Is this model of FinData was that they didn't have the right data protection infrastructure and setting, and they decided and they realized exactly what you were saying. So a lot of universities or even companies would go like hospital to hospital, like asking, "Hey, will you let us in?" or like, "Will you can we share your data and do something with them?" And that was a mess for privacy, for like value leakage of what can happen with this data, what products can be built. And what they decided to do is to kind of harmonize access. So they said, okay, instead of everybody just walking around, we say nobody can access so you cannot just walk in and just say, hey, I'm gonna like bribe you so you give me your data. No, there is a single access point. If you go outside the access point, you break the law. But now the access point, we will try to make it as fast as possible. And in the Nordics it works. Sad to say from Warsaw perspective. But it will be a single access point, but also we will check on like who are you and what is the reason for usage of this data and all that. And a striking conversation I had, and this is going to your question, to the crucial point, is that the conversation I had was, I asked, okay, but who does the decision? Who stamps the rubber? And you can go in, and there is no data flow, so there's a secure computing environment. They check, now it's a government produced, but also now there will be others that they review. If they after audit see that it doesn't copy data or whatever, doesn't have backdoors, they can give you your own secure environment. So you never copy data, you always perform calculations, so you never see the data in itself, and you just take out the results. And I said, okay, but I understand the entire procedure. Who stamps the rubber? And they said, yeah, the director. And that was striking for me. Like, I would say what we need and what needs to be in this health data access body, in the health data space, because without it, you are right, it might be taken over by corporations. We need supervisory of patients, citizens, of the people themselves. So they should see, like they did this patient jury in the NHS AI lab. You see the full documentation, 20 citizens sit, you pay them, so they review it and they say, do you like it? Do you think this is how we should handle data? If they agree, okay, you're good to go.
I didn't know that NHS example. Thank you for bringing that in. I'm gonna look that up. And yeah,
They messed so much with Palantir, with DeepMind, that they finally started taking
yeah,
greater care.
that's what we need. Like if you look at the Data Governance Act, and there is the Data Trust for Data Altruism, which has quite some explicit rules that before you get the data trust altruistic license to say that, you have to comply with a lot of rules. Now, I didn't see any European health data space rules that would work towards these bodies, like that give, as you said, like it's the director who approves. And I think the simplest way to solve this is to create an obligatory transparency register that registers all the transactions, and that is made public. Like if somebody wants to get access to data, there is in that transparency register data in there. We can NGOs, civic society groups can look into that, can monitor, but we need transparency. If we don't have transparency in that field, data, as you called it, value leakage, which I found a very interesting wording, but it's value leakage, because what we do is we shift value from the public sphere into the private sphere. And if data is then, because people think sometimes that I'm really exaggerating, but data is sometimes, it can create economical value, but it also can create social value. And not a lot of discussions have been around that social value. You talked about the triangle about fundamental rights, you talked about economical value, but we live in Europe and there is something what we call the social market economy. What is the social value of data? This is not when it's a pandemic. That's not social value. That's public health monitoring. But like, how far do we allow economics to play a role, and what are the common layers we're going to build, like similar to the libraries that we had in a city where we could go in there for free and read a book without anybody asking for access or control, but we could go in there. Like, what are the things that we will give in that, let's not call it the private sphere, but the digital sphere? What is public in that digital sphere? What is a common good asset where we can get access to without control, without being monitored or registered, or without these things? And I think in open source software that worked really, really well. Like, these things are in the open. The problem is that most of these libraries, and it's so beautiful that they use the word library, because you can make the analogy to the former libraries and public libraries. Like, there is no GitHub in the public sphere. Like, there is no storage. And I think the European health data space should do much more to go in that open direction, less control, because from reading these things, it looks more like a continuation of Game of Thrones, which is a feudal system where there are walls there, and everybody who watched these series knows that at the end, the one who said that they were the good ones even destroyed the whole the whole society. There was no democratization process, and perhaps that's what I'm missing. A democratization of access, and not further kingdoms where a director who can be highly biased, where non-transparent, transparency registers are being recorded, are available. And I think we should work on this.
Yeah, I think we're approaching a very similar, using a little bit of different languages and probably experiences we have from different sectors, but I think we're approaching a very similar point. So on transparency, I fully agree. I mean, like, how could ever any kind of supervision be done if you don't know what's inside, right? That's opaque decision making once again. I just see from the perspective of running a cooperative myself and seeing how in various countries, Germany included, there is this like Mitbestimmung model, right? All these ideas of co-determination, of including the people who are governed in companies, inside the boards and in management or supervision. I think it is impossible. There is this saying in Polish saying, nothing about us without us. And we cannot have reuse of healthcare data without the patients being involved in this. And I think if we could have this democratization and the social supervision, then it will probably lead to what you are saying. But I think it will be also a kind of spillover effect. So some of it, like, people will not be able to read from those health data libraries if we don't build, again, some interfaces that are usable, right, that tell you something, or that you build products and services on top, like, for example, digital health assistants. I think this is very possible, as in the AI things, that what we're building now is a kind of like new cognitive infrastructure for our society, like. And it's okay. I mean, people say it's less free will. I mean, how much free will you can have in a society that is so complex on so many levels and with so much data? If you wish, you can go back to living in the forest. That's okay. Nobody's gonna stop you. But if we wish to maintain any sanity in what we are seeing here, and have the speed that you mentioned, then we need new tools, and we need tools for our brain and for our cognition as well. So I think and data is the building block for that, right? But without free access to bricks and to this kind of infrastructure, you cannot build anything on top. So I think here we have full agreement. Now the question is, a kind of boots on the ground question is, can we make European health data space as a regulation better, or do we work around it, or what do we do with it? Because a similar discussion was when GDPR was passed, and a lot of people believed that it's great that we have at least this, right? Before that, they had the e-privacy regulation talks, couldn't really make it sharp. Finally, GDPR, after Snowden, GDPR was made possible. But now I see in various ways, I'm not sure GDPR solved anything in terms of big tech, but for sure it blocked some opportunities. And now we are approaching a similar point. So maybe we should, if we cannot reject it, we have to change it dramatically, right?
Well, one of the ways to change is communication. That's why we are sitting here together and having this summit. I think another way is to solve it is working on the concept of what I call, or what we call, data solidarity. Another Polish word, or very strong Polish related, but also European. It's part of the contract of Maastricht. Solidarity is one of the key values in Europe, and I think we should go to a model which is related to our copyleft license, where we say, like, if you get access to the data, you need to share all the extractions under that same license, and it should not be for all. Like, this should be not mandatory. But if I want, as a patient, to donate my data to a data trust of data altruism, and that data trust for data altruism puts my data under a copyleft license, I will know that all the derivatives out of there will lead to open knowledge. And I think something like this can be pushed forward. But we need the framework, and reading the policy papers and having been talking to commissioners and others, the more I try to explain myself on how to work around this and do this, the more I felt that people were working against me to find, because they thought this was a loophole, because patients can take their data and make it a real common, like something that is really a common good, not something that is an abstract of what I call a common good. And it's really hard because there was so much lobby, there was so much interest. Like, all the European health data spaces conversations in Germany are being funded by companies like IQVIA or others that have a history with re-identifying data and selling it for billions. Like, these are the people that are actually defining now how we should handle our data. And I think we need much more transparency, much more dialogues, and we will keep on having this conversation next year. We're going to start every second week with online sessions, bringing people together and building a community. So I'm really thankful for this conversation we had. And perhaps a last question to you, and before we close this session, like, if you would be able to change one thing out of the European health data space, what would it be? Like, if there's one thing that you would say, like, I can choose, and this is something I want to put in there.
I would definitely bake in a patient supervisory board, mandatory for every health data access body. Because I think letting people run this show would completely change the rules that they would set. But I don't think any member state, because the member states can build any kind of body they wish, right? They just have to designate it a data access body. But I don't think any member state will, on its own, give this power to the citizens and say, yeah, sure, you build the terms and you decide who gets access. Nobody's ever gonna decide on this. So I think it should be baked directly into the regulation.
Thank you so much, Jan, for having this very insightful conversation. I hope people are inspired to join, support, and make this much more a movement and a point of discussion. I think there's much more work to be done before we sign these European health data space proposals or make them something that is similar as a law. I think we are missing a really great opportunity to let Europe flourish and do it in the way how Europe should do it, in a solidaric and inclusive and very democratic way, which includes citizens. So thank you so much, Jan.
Thanks for having me here.